Robert Kane is a libertarian, and in this article, Responsibility, Luck, and Chance, he lays out the foundation for his view that he continues to develop in the decades following. And he's especially taking on one of the biggest criticisms against libertarianism and providing an initial response to that. Kane describes what he calls the luck principle. This is a principle brought against libertarian views. And the luck principle is stated as such. So we're taking this as a quotation because it's his principle. It's important to have the exact wording since he's thought about this carefully. So we have, if an action is undetermined at a time t, then it's happening rather than not happening at t would be a matter of chance or luck. And so it could not be a free action. It could not be a responsible action. And although this seems true, Kane acknowledges there's certainly an appearance of truth here. He argues that the luck principle is in fact false. So here is a rough assessment of the views, why people are often compatibilists instead of libertarians. The luck principle seems to be true because of several intuition pumps, as Kane calls these. Now, these are stories, little chains of thought that seem to support the luck principle, although none of these are full arguments. So they give you an idea of the neighborhood of what the arguments would look like, but we're just going to look at the, as he calls them, intuition pumps. Now, when free will is first considered, you're doing an introductory course, most students will respond, say they are libertarians, and not identify because they don't know what the word means initially, but describe themselves as libertarians in terms of what that means. They are incompatibilists. The idea that determinism rules out freedom is pretty common and intuitive. However, the reasons that support the luck principle have led the majority of philosophers to be compatibilist when it comes to the topic of free will. Now, I want to clarify here, I think he is correct on that. Surveys have indicated he is correct on that, but in my experience, it seems that the people who are philosophers who work on the topic of free will, that would not be true. The majority of those people are actually libertarians or hard incompatibilist. The view of compatibilism is not nearly as popular among the philosophers who work on the topic of free will. Okay, so let's get to the intuition pumps that are supposed to support the luck principle. And Kane has 8 of these. And again, they're not arguments, but we could maybe make some arguments out of some of these. So the first one here, whatever is undetermined is by chance. And chance is not under the control of anything or anyone. And so that seems to mean that you can't be free if indeterminism is true. An undetermined event, even if it's inside one's brain, so even if we grant the kind of thing that libertarians might want, when it's an undetermined event initiating an action, it seems to be a fluke. It's not a free or a responsible action. And if you put indeterminism between a choice and an action, well, that's just going to be a hindrance to freedom. Now, on that point, I think a lot of libertarians would agree. That's not where you want the indeterminism to be necessarily. Now, placing indeterminism at the start of an overt action would also be a hindrance to freedom. So we have this issue of where you locate the indeterminism. And, you know, libertarians might disagree on where that ought to be, but many people say it doesn't make sense when wherever you put it, it's going to be a hindrance. So Kane mentions Schopenhauer, and he gives this example of some guy's legs just starting to move and by chance. Well, it doesn't seem like he stood up and started walking out of free will if it's by chance. And 5 here, if a choice or an action is not determined, then it could have gone differently, which means given the exact same history up to the action or choice, the person could have done one way or the other way. But if that's the case, the action that was actually taken seems to be capricious or arbitrary. And this is the rough idea behind Van Inwagen's extensive arguments on the mystery of metaphysical freedom. And so this, again, is just an intuition pump here, but developed quite thoroughly by Van Inwagen. Even though he's not a compatibilist, he ultimately rejects the direction that this might seem to be going. Appealing to inclination without necessitation leaves one with the oft-ridiculed idea of this liberty of indifference. You have the freedom, but there's indifference in terms of what action is taken. So you can't really explain why one choice was made or why an action was taken instead of another. So that seems problematic. 7th now, indeterminism in the process of choosing always amounts to randomness, so that the outcome's then going to be a matter of chance, not a matter of choice. And then finally, the 8th one here is a little bit more important because Kane's going to address this one much more thoroughly. We'll talk about it in part 2. Suppose there are 2 possible worlds with an agent in one world and his counterpart in another world, and they're contemplating a moral decision. Now, in the 2 possible worlds, everything is the same up to the moment of decision. Now, in one world, the agent succumbs to the temptation. So maybe in the actual world, the person succumbs to the temptation, while in the other possible world, the agent does not. And so the difference just seems to be a matter of luck. Now, notice the types of words that have been used in these intuition pumps. They include words and phrases like luck, fluke, something being capricious or arbitrary, random, something being a matter of chance. So we have those kinds of ideas that say if you have indeterminism, you have those things, and those things are going to rule out free actions where one is responsible for what they've done. So how does Kane respond? First response is Kane questions this connection between something being indeterminate and something happening by chance or luck. And again, I just rehearsed some of these phrases, these terms that we've used, that we've seen in the intuition pumps, are from ordinary language, right? That's why we have a wide variety of them. However, when we're using the term indeterminism, it's a technical term. It really is a term that simply precludes determinism. It says determinism is false. Again, determinism being the idea that given any state of the universe at one point, there is only one possible future because of the laws of nature, right? So indeterminism says, no, you can have the laws of nature, a state of the world at a certain time, but there might be a variety of futures from that point forward. Second response of Kane is that he argues, look, indeterminism doesn't need to be present in all free action, so it's not like you have to have it all the time. One could act from a freely formed will, and even if the action is not indeterminate, it can still be considered a free action according to a libertarian. Why? Because the freely formed will was something that was indeterminate. So we have undetermined actions that form the will, and Kane calls these self-forming actions. So these are the big ones. These are the significant ones that libertarians need in order to make sense of a future event that might be determined and yet still free if it can be traced back to one of these self-forming actions. And self-forming actions occur when there are conflicts in our lives, and then we're torn between visions of what we should do or visions of whom we should become. But we're torn with our values of what kind of person we want to be. And so there are a few different examples of these kinds of situations. And we don't find ourselves in these kinds of situations all the time. So indeterminism doesn't have to be there constantly, right? So sometimes you're faced with a decision where you're motivated by self-interest, but you're also motivated by moral interest. Maybe you want to keep something that you found, but you're also motivated to try to return it to the rightful owner, right? Or in B here, we might be motivated by our present desires. We really want to eat that hamburger in front of us maybe, or long-term goals of remaining healthy when we've recognized we've already had one hamburger, the second one is going to put our health in jeopardy, something like that. So that happens all the time, not constantly throughout the day, but it's a common experience that we have. Another one might be difficult tasks, with which we have an aversion. We all have these, maybe it's vacuuming or dust, regular kind of housework, or working out, or fixing something. We have these challenges, and we just, and I've listed things that may not be that difficult, but we have these challenges in front of us and we don't want to do them. We don't have a natural desire to do them. They're just not enjoyable tasks. The other situations that I might add to this would when we have conflicting positive desires. We want to accomplish two different things that we're faced with. We have projects that need completed and we want to work on one and complete it. We're also pulled to work on the other in order to ultimately complete it. So it doesn't have to be a positive versus a negative situation. The same could occur with moral interests. There might be conflicting moral interests between, say, telling the truth and protecting someone from harm. So those can occur too. So that's just 5 different types of situations that might be cases where you have a self-forming action. So when self-forming actions come about, there's some indeterminism in our brains, argues Cain, and that's related to the inner tension that we feel in such circumstances. When we feel kind of torn between what we're doing, that's somehow our recognition of this indeterminism that's going on in our brain. And our decisions in self-forming actions are not determined, but they can be willed. So this is very important, obviously, for Bob's view of libertarianism. They can be willed voluntarily. So success or failure is undetermined, and yet its outcome will be caused by us. We are the cause of what happens as a result of our decision and action. So here's an example. We have a businesswoman who needs to get to an important meeting. So she's driven to succeed in business. There's a really important meeting. She needs to get there on time. It'll be problematic if she doesn't show up on time. She observes an assault in an alley on her way to the office where the meeting's at. And so now she's motivated to stop and help the person and call for help. But she's also motivated to go make sure that she gets to the meeting on time. Which will she choose, right? She, in this case, will follow through with the idea that she wills to stop. She does help, but it was indeterminate which action she was going to take. Now, in such a case, this is exactly when the luck principle is going to be trotted out, says Cain, right? It's undetermined. Then whether she helps the person or not is a matter of luck. And so it's not a free and responsible action. And so that's a challenge then to libertarianism. But Cain says we shouldn't view these as problematic. Consider these other cases. So we have the businesswoman case. Here's another case. Someone's trying to solve a problem. Maybe they're working on a math problem. Maybe they're trying to do their taxes or, do something complex. And they're working in an environment with a lot of background noise. Maybe that makes the task more challenging and difficult. Conversations are going on or something like that. So it's undetermined whether the person's going to succeed due to that chaotic atmosphere that the person is working in. Now, if they do succeed, it's still to their credit. They're responsible for their success. That's what they wanted to do. They had the goal of doing it, but it was indeterminate, could have gone the other way, yet they succeed. We should credit such a person's success. Here's another case. An assassin has this undetermined events in his nervous system that might cause a jerking in his arm and then subsequent failure of assassination attempt. So maybe they're set up to be a sniper and they just have a very small moment in time to complete the assassination. So will the arm jerk or not and cause failure? If, say, the assassin succeeds, well, he's still morally responsible for that success. If we find out that, oh, there could have been an undetermined action in his arm that would have prevented success, we don't say, oh, well, he shouldn't be held responsible for the assassination. Of course not. He's still morally responsible there, even though it was indeterminate whether or not he would succeed. Here's a third case. A husband's having an argument with his wife. He swings his arm down against a glass table and he intends to break it in that moment. Now, say there's indeterminism, and Kane puts these in the neural pathways that make the force of his arm swing indeterminate. And then it's indeterminate with whether the table is going to break or not. Now, if he succeeds, so to speak, right, his intent is to break the table, he is responsible for breaking the table. Okay, so what should we conclude from these examples? Well, that luck principle is false. It is invalid. So you can have an action with an undetermined outcome and yet still be free and morally responsible for that action. Now, in part two, we're going to look at Alfred Mealy's criticism of the defense that Keynes provided, a revision of the luck principle, and then how Keynes responds to that revised luck principle.